living on this planet, especially recently, in the midst of chaos, pretty much, with all these, recently earthquake, Irma, and other hurricanes showing up out of the blue, fires, and political unrest, people being mean and cruel to one another, most of us being cruel and mean towards the environment, can make one be somewhat unsettled in the mind. And that is putting it quite, lightly. So you have to be living under a rock, as we say in English, to not be affected by all these things happening. And one thing that we often forget is that things of similar nature have been happening in this universe and other places, but especially on this planet. Perhaps, given the social media, given the information that we have at our fingertips, they're happening rather quickly and in much tightly packed time periods, which cause us inevitably to become unsteady and seek some form of comfort in what is familiar, especially what is familiar, perhaps something that we carry over from our childhood, from better times, or how things are supposed to be. And we each have an idea. And if we don't, guess what? The media is never short of coming up with images of that sort to tell us, to convey to us, in fact, to direct us to look for what it is that we need to be looking for, striving to see in our world. So there's this dichotomy that we, as human beings, now as adults, many of us, are still carrying beyond the years of Disney-esque way of thinking. The big bad wolf is still there. And it comes in all shapes and sizes. And one big presence of it is found in the form of fear, which is the language of chaos. Hence the element of unsteadiness, creating that perturbance in the mind. Show me a person who has lost their steadiness of mind, and I will show you a person who can do anything, no matter how deplorable, unthinkingly inhumane it might be. They will do it, given the circumstances. World War II is a perfect example. Cold War is another example. You look at Syria a few years ago and you've seen the images and videos of people, human beings, treating other human beings in such ways that, Stephen King might be just like rubbing his head, just like, wow, I never thought of that. I know I might be, saying it in a way that might sound banal, but not in any way try to trivialize these things. These shake us up on a very deep core levels. So everywhere we look, we are bombarded with these extra images of chaos and the threat of more to come. So for the last several talks, I've tried to address some of these issues from a Buddhist perspective. So I was trying to come up with another definition of chaos. And looking at it from the eyes of the Dhamma. And I saw that there is a personality or a presence in the Dharma that matches it perfectly. It's called Mara. Some people say, oh, Mara is the Buddhist version of Satan that you find in Judeo-Christian religions. Yes and no. What Mara does in Buddhist tradition is, in fact, dissuade the practitioner off of their object, off of their purpose in life. If they've come to the Dharma, that means that they've really pushed against a lot of obstacles, and perhaps most often they've had enough accumulated merits to get to that point where Dharma is available at that time where they're born, plus they found teachings and a teacher who would actually teach them how to practice, pretty much. Now, Mara, throughout the Buddhist history, you see it in the suttas, how he sneaks, I say he because he usually is represented as he, even though he's of a different realm, they say, but he can take on any image, any size, any shape, any phenomenon you could think of. Even one as gross as a big umbrella phenomenon, status, etc., as chaos, in the form of the geopolitical unrest, the environmental havoc that is being wreaked on this planet, even though people are still saying, oh, there's no global warming. I mean, I was in the Caribbean a few days ago. I was like, are you kidding me? The temperatures around the Gulf Coast have risen up to 86, 89 degrees Fahrenheit. That's way beyond what a hurricane needs in order for it to form. So when glacial, the ice caps are melting, they are fresh water. So when they are melting, what's happening is the salinity of the water is no longer in congruence to what the salt water needs to be in order for it to not vaporize so easily. So when there's less salt, more fresh water, which is the case of the oceans currently, we have hurricanes, massive ones, category 5s, and I wouldn't be surprised if we can come up with 6 in a 7 category. Terrifying. So where does that fit in as far as the Dharma is concerned? Well, Dharma is not, again, about anything to do with living on a Himalayan kuti or a hut, meditating on your own for whatever to attain enlightenment. That's never been the Buddhist path. The Buddhist path is about engaging and helping the person who has a limited lifespan on this planet. Okay, that doesn't... How does that address the situation of what we mentioned earlier about unsettling, the sense of unsettlement, this turbulence in the mind? Especially when we are constantly being fed. Every time you pick up your phone, you look at the news feed or whatever, whew, there's hardly any positive news. Well, that has a bearing on the mind. Cortisol levels go up. Adrenaline kicks in. Serotonin levels drop. And people start to have immunological deficiencies. Anxiety medication goes up. Now we are giving medication, anti-anxiety medications to kids indefinitely in the United States. Indefinitely means that that person is not going to be having a hope that one day they're going to come off of it. And we're still feeding ourselves more and more fearsome possibilities of what may come. Well, that goes counter to what Buddhism is trying to teach us. What it's trying to teach us is, I know you've probably heard many teachers say when they describe the Dhamma, it's all about impermanence, it's all about dukkha, it's all about non-substantiality or non-self. Okay, fine. How does that tie into all of this? Remember that bit about us carrying over some of the Disney-esque way of thinking, the black and white, the dichotomy of life, good versus evil, that the media loves to have us, the consumerism mentality loves to keep us entangled into? us versus them, which politicians love to keep us swamped in, is by going outside of ourselves and by seeking something other than what is happening in front of us. So we're trying to relive something that is completely non-existent. So we're trying to find solace within, refuge in something that is completely designed to be impermanent. And one of the characteristics of impermanence is that it causes suffering. It's unavoidable. They're very much tied into each other. Impermanence, due to the fact, if you're holding your loved one, if you're sharing your life with someone or something in your life that means so much to you, given the law of nature, which in this case happens to be impermanence, that person is going to be, or yourself is not going to be there indefinitely because of impermanence. We all know this. All of us have experienced this, but oftentimes the Buddha had to repeat this in order for us to really understand it on a visceral level. So we understand it. If we understand it on a visceral level, we cannot not experience the emptiness that comes when that loved one is no longer there. When our bodies don't behave the way they're supposed to. When a bodybuilder all of a sudden 30, 40, 50 years later discovers that he or she has to walk with a walker, where he or she has to ask for help because they can't go up a flight of 10 stairs. That's pain. That's suffering. Now this is taking place when the mind is perturbed as well. So when we're exposing ourselves to all this fear-mongering, this propaganda that's going on, and the factual circumstances around us, undeniably, and we find ourselves inevitably leaning into what's happening outside. And that is my cautionary advice today. So the topic today can be narrowed down to finding our way in a chaotic world. Because it's so easy to get sucked in to what's happening, to join the folds of other people like ourselves. There's 7.7 or probably 8 billion by now of us that are being, corralled into a state that lacks unshakability. And that's where the Dhamma comes in. When we talk about being a human being, living in a human realm, Buddhism has, in Buddhist cosmology, the Buddha broke it down, and this is not specifically only Buddhist. You can also find this within the culture that, contemporary culture of the Buddha itself. However, the way the Buddha described it was totally different, because there was a time, even to this day, in the Vedic culture or the Brahmanism, they still believed that gods and goddesses, etc., they live like Brahmas, they live forever. That's how you have Vishnu, Shiva, etc. And Buddha came in and said, no. Even those gods, even those Brahmas themselves, they are subject to impermanence, suffering, and non-substantiality. However, when you factor in the fact that these people, these beings, live for such a long time, it could be similar to us turning to an ant or a fruit fly that has a span of probably half a day to three days, and tell this fruit fly, hey, do you know that there's these giant beings, bipeds, walking around, and they live close to 100 years. Some of them over 115, 130 years. They just go, get out of here. That's impossible. That's impossible. You're supposed to live half a day. That's how it works. Similarly, for many of us, this might sound strange when you look at the text and you see how the Buddha is describing the lifespans which end. Now, I just wanted to put that out there because I want to come back to the human realm, because that's what mostly concerns us. Whether there's gods, goddesses, it really doesn't matter when it comes to the actual practice. Now, it doesn't mean that they're not integral parts of the teachings. They are. Some teachers out there, new Buddhists, secular Buddhist teachers, are saying, no, they're just part of the mumbo-jumbo of ancient India, which is absolutely hurtful to the teachings. And that's why teachers, Dharma teachers, have a tremendous responsibility to uphold the Dhamma. Otherwise, this Dharma is not going to last for another 100 years in the West. I was mentioning that yesterday to the group of meditators. We cannot take liberties with the Dhamma. That's a luxury no one has. If we are holding the truth of the Dhamma, if we're going back to the experience that this being gave to us through the teachings, which is experientially there for all to go through and taste it for themselves. Ehipassiko means come and see, practice it. So we have to be very careful when we water down the teachings by saying there's no rebirth, there's no karma, there's no other realms, etc. So that's very arrogant. In fact, ignorant, which is the epitome of stupidity. Coming back to the human realm, which that makes part of, the lower we go from a human realm, hungry ghosts, you probably have heard, animal realms, those are beings we can really relate to, love, care for, see their pain, see their enjoyment. When you pet a cat or a dog, you see when they purr or they just look at you, there's so much love. You understand, you can connect. You might not be necessarily talking English or Japanese or Chinese with them, but you know what's being experienced there with the other being. But there are other beings that we cannot see or touch, however they're there. So the lower you go down the ladder of existence, the 31 realms of existence, you find more and more pain added to the equation, and until you get to the hell realms, where there is no pleasure at all. The closer you come up towards the human realm, you have an almost equal possible amount of pleasure versus pain. Now that doesn't mean that all of us are going to be experiencing that, because there's this element, a variable of karma, which means you might be born in a wealthy family, you might be a king of whatever, or a queen, but you might have a very sickening disease that might take your life away, or you can have an accident and you just die. All that gone. So there are these several different factors, and incalculable variables, in fact, to bring in. But what I would like you to think about is the human realm has a good proportion of possibility for pleasure versus pain. Now, the higher up you go the ladder of existence, you will find within the realm, different realms of gods and Brahma realms, more and more pleasure and less of pain, if any. Now, we happen to live on the perfect alignment, the Goldilocks syndrome, right? The Earth, planet Earth, is at the perfect distance from the sun. A little bit further out, we'd be all frozen. A little bit too close, we'd be like Mercury, fried. But there's only life here on this planet, because it's the perfect distance, about 93 million miles away from the sun. Okay. So life can be promoted. Well, similarly, in order for us to actually come to the Eightfold Path, come to the Dharma, we need to have tasted what pain is. We needed to have some level of discontent with the living experience, with displeasurable experiences. What many of us do, however, is we get so pulled into thinking that, no, we want to bring in the realm of gods and live on this planet of human realm as if we are living in a heavenly realm. It's a wonderful aspiration, and it's something that we all need to aspire to. However, that negates the importance of, hey, this realm is not designed for that. You look at Africa, little children dying of hunger, and they're only a few days old or a few months old. But we want to change that, and we need to, and we should. We do our best to do that. Buddhism doesn't teach us to, no, ignore that, hey, tough luck. It never says that. It's the most engaged practice, religious practice there is that I've come across. To go out and help. However, it is also a realistic path. It brings the attention back to the person who is present in this life with the full knowledge that there is only a limited time that we are here on this planet, and what are we going to do about it? And that's when we're getting closer and closer to the goal of the Dharma. The Dharma's path, the reason why we have the Dharma, the Four Noble Truths, there is suffering. The Buddha's second noble truth was not, yeah, there's suffering and go out and then fix it. He never said that. Sometimes we are pulled out into the outside world trying to do that, however. Completely negating the importance of, wait a minute, there's suffering, what do I need to do about it? I have to first ask where it came from. What is the cause of suffering? Ignorance, craving is there, I see. Whose craving is it? Is it the leader of the country? Is it this person? Now, if you do the math and stuff and calculus and whatever, you might say, yeah. But that's irrelevant for our living experience now. For the experience of pain that we're going through now. And that's where the third noble truth comes in. Which is a cessation. He promised, he gave us the key by saying there is a cessation of suffering. See, if the Buddha stopped there, yeah, there's suffering and then there's a cause of suffering, then we'd be in a lot of trouble. He gave us a formula to actually apply in our daily lives and see proof. I might not be able to feed every single child in Africa. I might die trying and not even put a dent on that. But I lost my life. My opportunity to actually cut the cord of samsara for more pain. See, we've been coming and going for countless lifetimes and will continue to do so. However, we will never be able to cut ourselves off impermanence, suffering, and non-substantiality, because those are the fires. They're the hearth, basically, that keeps this thing, the engine, going. You might have tremendously wealthy store of merits for all the kindness that you've done. That's beautiful, but they will run out like a bank account. Ultimately, you're just going to come back, and when you come back, there's no guarantee that you might come across the Dharma available at the time. See, when the Buddha was around, Bodhisattva Gautama, when he was walking around, he was struggling to find the path. He was trying to find somebody who could give him the key, because the Dharma by that time is lost. In fact, that is one of the requirements for a Buddha to appear in the universe. The Dharma has to be completely gone. And imagine if you and I are doing all these wonderful things in the world, but we end up coming back into a world that doesn't have the Dharma. Guess what? We still have the defilements. We still have our lusts, our anger, and sooner or later, again, that bank account of merits are going to run out. And you're stuck. So having a store of merit, I've heard so many teachers, I was shocked years ago when I was speaking with some teachers and Buddhist teachers. And they said, no, forget it. I mean, there's no Nibbana anymore. Like in this life, in this world, you will not be able to attain Nibbana. And they came from a very good place in their heart. So they weren't being mean or heartless. They were being compassionate, but they were using what they've come to see in the world as a reference and telling me and guiding me. And they said, okay, so I said, what's the thing then? What's the alternative? What am I supposed to do? They said, just go ahead and add more dana, generosity. Meditate, clear your mind. But as far as reaching enlightenment in this life, you're fooling yourself. Basically, that's what they were saying. And this wasn't just one person or two people. And I was shocked. And that's when I went back to the suttas. And I read the terms. The Buddha gave wonderful definitions of the Dharma, synonyms for the Dhamma. One of them is akaliko, timeless. Opanayiko, leading onwards. Pachattam veditabbo vinyuhiti. What that means is to be realized by the wise. And then says, ehi passiko. Don't take my word for it. See, practice. See for yourself. That's where the empirical aspect of the Dhamma comes in. If we don't mess around with it, if we don't add our own versions of what we would like the Dhamma to be, which is what today's many of the secular Buddhist teachers are doing, unfortunately. I'm very critical of them because for me, the Dhamma is supreme. We are here today, gone tomorrow, but I'm also thinking about the posterity. What will happen to other future generations of Buddhists? Will they even have an explanation of the Dhamma proper? So Buddhism is not passive, it's very courageous, it stands its ground, it's a heroic path. If I take something from Mahayana tradition, Manjushri has the sword of wisdom. The audacity to stand in face of ignorance. So Theravada tradition can actually use some of these symbols to make a point. A powerful one at that as well. So coming and bringing this back to our own lives, we need to understand that yes, this is happening around us. Okay, what can I do about it right now? The first important imperative that we have is what's happening within me right now. Your tranquility of mind is your supreme priority. Remember, as I was flying back a few days ago to the States, they run the safety procedures on the planes, and then when they talk about the air, mask coming down from the top, they say, even if you have a child next to you, don't put it on them first, put it on yourself first. If we acknowledge that simple fact as, yeah, of course, it's a no-brainer. I mean, if something happens, and as I'm putting this, mask on this child that I care about, something happens and mine falls out, and I'm not doing it right, I'm gone. And the child probably lost their possibility of a survival. So that's why we're putting this on, so that we're more coherent and aware. So if we're doing that for this physical body, for its safety, how come we're not thinking about the bigger picture? So by turning the gaze, turning the lens back to ourselves is not copying out, not at all. It is the most courageous act you could commit to. That takes guts. To stand in front of all that fear propaganda and say, you know what? I see you, I know what it is, but I need to first focus in and see what's happening within me. There's this story of from China, I believe, and this farmer had, you probably have heard this, this farmer has this wonderful white stallion. And his neighbors, the villagers, they come in and they always say, oh, you have the most beautiful stallion. Oh, this is incredible. I wish we had it. We wish we had it. You're such a lucky, this person and that. And his answer to that is, perhaps. The next day, they wake up and the stallion is gone. Everybody hears about it. Everybody comes to his place and say, that must have been horrible. You must feel bad. Like this might have actually brought you some gold coins, and now you don't have that possibility. You're lost. A treasure. And he's like, Yeah, perhaps. A few days later, that horse, that stallion, comes in as she brings with her 6 other stallions. And now the same neighbors come over and they're like, wow, this is amazing. You're the luckiest person in this side of, Yangtze River, for example. And he goes, perhaps. And they scratch their heads and walk away. And a few days later, this man's only son falls from one of these stallions and breaks his ankle, breaks his leg. The neighbors come huddle and they're just like, oh, your only son. Now he's not going to be able to do much work. Probably that kind of lowers his chances of finding a mate, because he's not going to be able to function properly, this and that, whatever. And he's like, perhaps. 1 week passes, and all of a sudden the emperor's men show up, the army shows up into this village, and guess what? They're drafting the young boys. And every family that has a son is taken away. And these neighbors, kicking and screaming, come over to his house and they say, you're lucky. And he says, perhaps. See, opening that, knowing where you are at all times is what this practice is all about. Practicing awareness brings about wisdom. They go hand in hand. During meditation yesterday, I was mentioning it to the class, how one of the best ways to increase wisdom is to look at impatience with the eyes of patience. Being fear-driven gets that patience out the door. That's the first criteria of losing the tranquility of your mind. And one of the best ways to identify a meditator is you look at them and there's a sense of serenity. And if you do want to bring in that quality of divine realms into this human realm, the Buddha also gave a cure for that too. They're called the Brahma Viharas. Loving kindness, compassion, altruistic joy, and equanimity. Upekkha. You sit next to a person who's been practicing metta for a while, and everything they touch has been touched by metta. You can't help but to feel like you're in the presence of a divine realm. I don't need to see divine realms to believe in them. I'm seeing it right there in the person who's experiencing metta, whose every action, the way they arrange things, the way they write, the way they speak, the way they cook, the way they smile, is tinged completely with metta. And that's the best way that we can change our lives and the world around us. Because chaos will happen, hurricanes will happen, earthquakes will happen. But one thing else for sure is going to happen is we're going to die one day. And we might not have the mental coherence to be able to practice as we could right now. And that's where the element of samvega, urgency, has to be brought in. Urgently sitting down and seeing, okay, what can I do about it? Can I turn my gaze outward? Or can I start with myself first, organize myself, and come out from there and change the world around me? This culture does not necessarily give us enough tools for that, or support us in that. And that's where we have to be islands on ourselves. And with islands we can create a continent. And that's how we can actually become the best activists there are. Otherwise we're just depleting our energy, valuable energy. So start with a smile. Start with a smile towards yourself, to disengage yourself from the sense of resentment and hatred and unforgiveness towards yourself for whatever reasons. And then start to be generous with your smile. Give it away. It's the gift that keeps giving, really. And you start seeing the world around you start to change. All of a sudden that annoying neighbor is no longer annoying as such. So I hope that helps. Is that good enough time, Bhante? I mean, I could go on, but
Just, you know.
is that a good thing? All right, questions, please. Yes.
I could see how we can be sort of active, politically active, through our own actions. You know, through the individual actions that we take every day. You know, the choices that we make with consumerism and whatnot. Are there cases in the Dhamma where the Buddha was politically active? I seem to recall a story where he prevented two tribes fighting over water.
Yes.
Can you touch on that and how that relates to our ability to actually be politically active as a group?
The incident that you're talking about had to do with something that took place between two farmers. And it was just about a stream that they had to share between two farmlands. And one person basically was hogging it, was not willing to share that. He wanted one extra day or 2 extra days during the week to water his farmland, his cultivated land, especially given the fact that at that time there was somewhat of a drought. And he says something to the other, and because they belong to two separate portions of that region, politically, etc., lineage-wise. So one of them says a mean word, insulting word to this person's leader. And that person retaliates. And then the word spread around. And guess what? In no time, it reaches the ruling individuals of both segments. By the way, they're cousins, and they are the Buddha's cousins. So, lo and behold, soon enough you have two armies facing each other, ready to go to battle, kill with drawn swords. At that time, the Buddha shows up, and because they know who he is, and because he's a Sakyan, and they're both Sakyan themselves, or related to Sakyan, the one of them, but the one group was definitely Sakyan. They can't, because it's an insult in the presence of a religious, spiritual person, especially their own relation, to go ahead and spill blood. It's unthinkable. So they wait for him to go, and he doesn't. It's like, okay, I guess we need to do something. So the heads of both armies go and have an audience with the Buddha. At that point, the Buddha says, what is the cost of water compared to a cost of human blood? That is a political move. That is a strategic statement. That is a non-violent, cognitively powerful, no way out type of an equation for the other person to just concede and say, water is nothing compared to life, to a human being. And then he brings out the fact that these people were children. I remember you. You guys were children. We used to play together. Remember? These are cousins. These are brothers, uncles, fathers that you relate to. Sit down and eat together. Now you're doing this. So if we bring that type of a cool, calmed approach in our own political dealings, things would be, I think, a lot better. Instead of pointing fingers. I know that years ago, when I first came to the States, when moved actually with my family, and I would see these elections going on, and people were, candidates going at each other. No, actually it was about commercials, car commercials. Literally, people like Mercedes was standing up and really talking down and insulting, let's say, VW or BMW or something. And for me, that was shocking. People were so mean-hearted in even their commercials. And then I see it later on in the elections. People were just going at it and just like mudslinging. And I'm like, these are educated people? They have Harvard degrees and all that. Like, are you kidding me? So when we have that type of a mechanism versus what the Buddha said, how he approached that situation, you're going to have this state of affairs. So we need to recalibrate Even if the majority is doing that, believe me, when you walk into the room and have that approach, things will be different. But it requires tremendous courage on that person's part to stand against that noise. And that's why I say, to practice the Dharma, you need to be tremendously courageous. This is not for the weak, I'm sorry to say. It's about the courageous among us. When anger comes in and you're looking at anger instead of at the person who cussed you out, instead of at the person who tossed that rock at you, if you're looking at the anger itself, I'm not saying stand in the way of the rock coming at you, that changes the whole scenario. Because now you're back to home base. And from there you can actually make a change. Guaranteed. But you can't make a change outside, guaranteed. No one can say that. But if you start from here, and that's how the Buddha was able to change their impetuses or their drives. And they were ready to go at each other. But he came from his own presence, his serenity. And they weren't just influenced by the words he said, they were also influenced by his personality and his serenity of mind, which is inseparable. Sorry. I hope that answers. Yes?
So I have a question about, so I know for some of us who come from a Christian tradition,
yes,
we reject biblical fundamentalism, right? Whatever the Bible said about women, gays, slaves,
yes,
we're like, we don't see it that black and white anymore. What I like about Buddhism is you question everything. Right? How do we make sure we don't fall into like Dharma fundamentalism? The Buddha said this, and it can never be changed. We can never reject it. And I guess my very meager understanding of Buddhism today is, if you get to question everything, and this is probably very American of me as well, right? It's like, well, I don't have to accept it wholesale. Why can't I treat it like the Bible and say, you know, these things are good, these things in it? I don't need to take this, you know, divine revelation or Buddhist revelation. Who cares what the person's saying, right? Like, this is not how we see the world today, and you know, so I guess like, how do you follow the Dharma without becoming a fundamentalist, right? The way you can follow the Bible in a good way as opposed to not be a fundamentalist. How do you do that?
That's a very good question, because it goes to the crux of the matter. But I'm going to answer it while using some of your words. It is problematic. It becomes, because you just changed garments. I come from a Judeo-Christian background myself. And I see that around also in Buddhism as well. There's still the same defilements as they had while being Christian or Jewish or even Muslim. It's still there, but they're wearing Buddhist titles. They have a nice little, you know, Kala Chakra or something, whatever. And then now what they've done is they've adopted another book, which now they call a holy book. It doesn't have anything to do with the book. It has everything to do with my attitude towards the book. So when you said treating the Dharma like I did treat the Bible, yes, absolutely, that's a problem. And that's not what I'm trying to say. There is experience. See, if I want to know Euclidean divisions, if I need to know arithmetic, if I need to know what makes granite, you know, or the chemical molecular structure of H2O, I need to understand laws of chemistry, rules of chemistry. Once I've understood it, I can actually go ahead and look at two atoms of hydrogen versus one atom of oxygen. Okay, I understand that. And I know the atoms, and I know the electrons, etc., and I know the bonds. I have a clear understanding. Now, no one has to come and tell me, hey, do you believe in chemistry? Like, I understand. I know gravity. I don't have to sit down. I don't need to understand the processes that are taking place through the walls that make these lights go on. The experiential approach that Buddhism has in its repeatability, and that's why Buddhism, it's tricky because many people say that Buddhism is like science. Yes and no. I've taught science for many years, so I was also in that camp. I would say, yeah, Buddhism. And then I started to think about, not exactly. The reason why it can be called similar to science is because of its repeatability. If you come to me and two other people come to me and with your wholehearted drive, seeking knowledge and understanding and experience, I give you a tool, I give you a meditation object. Let's say I give you the Eightfold Path. And you're diligently practicing it. Guess what? You will attain, you will experience exactly what is said in this book. There is no room for guesswork. Now, what allows me to say that is my experience, the teacher's experience I've had, and the countless other people who've attained in this practice, in this tradition, which I cannot say about the other traditions, other religions, myself. I can say about it because I've seen it happen with meditation students I've helped personally, fellow meditators, and teachers I've actually sat at their feet and learned from, and still do. That brings me back to one of the qualities or the synonyms of the Dharma. Ehi passiko. Come and see, passiko. For yourself. I don't have to teach or tell you or the other two meditators, hey, this is what's going to happen to you, because you're like, duh, I'm experiencing it. I don't need to believe in it. And that's what distinguished the Buddha's senior disciples, lay disciples. One time, Chitta, who was the foremost lay disciple of the Buddha in attaining an anagami state, and he was first a Jaina, but he switched because he saw what the Buddha was teaching, and through his practice, he became an anagami, which is a non-returner. Now the problem was the Jains who were counting on his support for dana were not happy about this. And one day as he was approaching the Buddha's monastery, he was too early, so he didn't want to wake the Buddha up. It was early in the morning, and he stopped by the camp of the Jains. And knowing who he was, and knowing now that he was a disciple of the Buddha, they wanted to challenge him. And one of the challenges was none other than Mahavir, who was the top guy of Jainism. And he started challenging him by saying, hey, do you believe in the Buddha saying this? Do you believe in this? And he's like, no, nope. And he's like, aha! So why are you following this? And he turns and says, I don't believe because there's no need for belief. I know it. I know what yogurt tastes like. No one has to tell me. I know what a fresh orange, when I cut through it and it's hot, I bite into it, I know what it will taste like. You don't have to tell me what it tastes like. I don't have to believe you. I know it. So my efforts here is to invite you to come and taste it for yourself. And then, don't count on my words or any of the Dharma teachers. Count on your experience of it. Not because one person speaks so eloquently or makes sense or uses interesting metaphors. That's nonsense. That goes away. Or how much of a following they have. Is it the Dalai Lama, or do they get enough YouTube hits or likes? This is nonsense. Because what's fashionable today is nonsense tomorrow. If I'm vain, if I'm empty, if I'm shallow, if there's no substance underneath, it will show up. If I'm mediocre, it will show up. However, your experience will not be denied. To you at least. And that is the huge difference between coming from a Judeo-Christian background where we look at it, something and say, oh, this is the holy something, versus the Dharma. I hope that answers your question. I know I went over, right? Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Chandana. And we're going to start